Desperately needed aid is not reaching Gazans, but who's to blame? Israel? Egypt? The UN? Hamas? We'll unpack that and more this week on Today Unpacked's This Week Unpacked by Unpacked. First up, an overview of this week's top stories in Chapter 1, the wrap-up. Number 8, another day, another hospital. As the war continues, Al Jazeera reported on a massacre at the Kamal Adwan hospital, while Israeli media reported on 70 terrorists surrendering from the hospital, and the hospital director confirming the hospital was a Hamas operational hub. Number 7, tough going in Gaza. Israeli and Arabic media are in agreement for once, as the IDF is having a rough time in Gaza. And while Israel knew this would be a long and difficult war, Arabic media is portraying Israel's openness about that as a weakness and failure. Number 6, hostages killed. 3 hostages escaped their captors, but were mistaken for terrorists by Israeli soldiers and killed. The devastating and disturbing episode raised scrutiny of Israel's rules of engagement in Gaza. Officers came to the soldiers' defense, pointing out the incredibly complex conditions the soldiers are operating under, while a preliminary IDF investigation said the shootings were a serious violation of open-fire rules. And the IDF chief of staff said the event could have been prevented. Iris Chaim, the mother of one of those killed, Yotam, sent a powerful message of love to the soldiers involved, saying, "Everything that happened is absolutely not your fault, and nobody's fault, except that of Hamas." Number 5, can you dig it?
Can you dig it?
Israel uncovered a massive tunnel in Gaza that came within a quarter-mile of the border. Hamas released a video mocking the discovery, saying, "You arrived late. The mission had already been completed," implying the tunnel was no longer needed after having been used on October 7th. The IDF explained that the tunnel cost millions of dollars to build, money that could have otherwise been used by Hamas to better the lives of Palestinians. Number 4, aid or Band-Aid. Israel opened one of its border crossings to Gaza for increased aid, as commercial goods made it into the Strip for the first time since October 7th. Videos went viral of aid trucks being looted, and Israel charged that armed gunmen stole some aid shipments, all while Human Rights Watch accused Israel of intentionally starving civilians as a tool of war, with Israel responding that Human Rights Watch doesn't have a leg to stand on since it still has not condemned Hamas atrocities on October 7th. More on these dueling narratives later. Number 3, what's Yemen got to do with it? Houthi rebels in Yemen have vowed to keep up attacks on ships in the Red Sea Strait, as major shipping firms opt out of using the waterway, and the US announced an international naval coalition to protect the ships in the strait. Number 2, Hamas v. Hamas. Contradicting reports on ceasefire talks have spun out into different narratives over who wants a ceasefire, and suspicion that Hamas's leadership inside and outside of Gaza are increasingly at odds. More on this later. Number 1, UN says what?
What?
The UN Security Council spent the week negotiating over wording of a resolution calling for a suspension of hostilities in Gaza, unfettered aid, and the release of all hostages. Unlike last week's UN General Assembly vote, this one is complicated by 2 factors. First, the US's veto power in the Security Council, and second, that all resolutions in the Security Council are considered binding. What does that mean? We'll get into it later with Yirmiyahu Danzig. But first, Chapter 2, Antiviral. Jerry Seinfeld is going viral, and not because of his secret anti-aging formula, but because he landed in Israel this week and toured the sites of the October 7th massacres and met with the families of hostages.
He asked me which way is Israel. I don't fly off the handle.
Despite shutting down his Twitter account long ago, Alec Balwin was back on Twitter this week. Baldwin was out for a stroll when he was mobbed by an anti-Israel protest, asking him if he condemned Israel. His fiery response went viral.
You ask stupid questions. Ask me a smart question.
And now, Chapter 3, Beyond the Echo Chamber. Today we'll look at 2 stories that are getting very different reporting depending on your news source: ceasefire talks and aid to Gaza. On the ceasefire front, the Wall Street Journal is reporting divisions in Hamas's leadership, as dueling narratives appear over ceasefire talks and the future of Gaza. See, when the war began, Hamas was saying it wanted a ceasefire and a prisoner swap, and cast Israel as the obstacle to stopping the violence. At the time, Israel insisted Hamas's offer to trade all the hostages taken October 7th for all the Palestinians in Israeli prisons and detention centers was disingenuous, but the world wasn't buying it. This week, the story has begun to shift. Israeli media reported that Israel is seeking another temporary ceasefire in exchange for hostages, and knows the price will be high. But Israeli media was quick to point out Hamas officials' refusal to negotiate a hostage release while fighting continues. Saudi Arabia's Al Arabiya and Qatar-funded Al Arabi El Jadid were also saying that Israel was ready for a ceasefire while highlighting Hamas's rejection of negotiations. Qatari Al Jazeera was reporting that Israel was seeking a ceasefire, but cast it as a submission to pressure by the US and hostage families. Al Jazeera wasn't reporting on Hamas's initial rejection of talks. But on Wednesday, everybody was reporting Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh's visit to Cairo for ceasefire talks. Hopes were high, but not for long. So why the shifting positions? We'll ask Yirmiyahu Danzig about that in a bit. But first, let's look at how Israel is trying to turn the tables on the narrative of aid to Gaza. Until recently, the narrative was that Israel was obstructing aid to Gaza. But this week, new competing narratives began to develop. Just as Human Rights Watch was charging that Israel was intentionally starving Gazans, Israeli media was reporting that Israel has, for the first time, opened a border crossing from Israel into Gaza and has begun transferring aid through the crossing, saying that Israel is doing everything it can to get food and aid into Gaza, but blamed the holdup on Egypt and the UN, who aren't processing aid trucks fast enough. At the same time, Israeli media is reporting that aid trucks that have entered Gaza are getting looted by civilians and hijacked by gunmen. Sky News English reported aid trucks entering from Israel as well as looting, and seemed to have reported on Israeli accusations against the UN, but then deleted the post. At least, I can't find it anymore, anywhere. Saudi Al Arabiya is reporting that Israel has made progress, but that Israeli efforts are insufficient, and doesn't mention anything about Israel's claim that Egypt and the UN are at fault. And Qatari Al Jazeera, which pummeled Israel for weeks on the issue of aid shipments, has largely stopped reporting on the shipments. No mention of Israel opening a border crossing for aid or Israeli accusations against Egypt and the UN. And all of this is colored by the long-delayed UN vote on a ceasefire. To explain how, we go to Chapter 4, Zooming Out. I asked Yirmiyahu Danzig, host of our sister channel Unpacked, to give us some perspective on all of this.
Israel's agenda is so that the UN resolution doesn't compel Israel to stop its war against Hamas, and so far that it compels Israel to allow more humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, that they maintain their ability to prevent weapons from being smuggled in alongside the humanitarian aid. I think what's more compelling here is the American position, because it's very clear that the Biden administration is trying to figure out how to deal with the reality that the majority of Americans don't approve with the way that the Biden administration has dealt with this war. And a lot of that is because of certain pressures within the Democratic Party to basically get Biden to put more pressure on Israel to have a ceasefire, to allow more humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. And so Biden is trying to both maintain his promises to Israel for them to continue their war against Hamas until Hamas is destroyed, until they achieve regime change, while at the same time figuring out how to communicate to his constituents in America that he's actually on the Democratic side in terms of their values, supporting Israel, but also caring for Palestinians in Gaza. We should also consider that even if this resolution goes through the Security Council in a language that Israel doesn't like or that isn't favorable to the Israelis, that doesn't mean then that the next resolution, which could put sanctions on Israel, would get through, because the Americans will still have the ability to veto that. So there's a very complicated dynamic at play when it comes to the relevance and the implication of these UN resolutions, even at the Security Council.
Chapter 5, Ask a Bubbe.
Should I talk about Super Mario Brothers? When my children were little, they played this game, Super Mario Brothers, where if you caught a mushroom, you caught an extra life. And that's such a fun, amazing concept. But you know what? Life is finite. I've been thinking a lot about the videos sent out the elderly captives and their plea to be released. And I was thinking that what they really wanted is they want more time with their families, and more time with their wives, their children, their grandchildren, more time to walk in the gardens, more time to see the sunshine, more time to do good and to have goodness done to them. I think that it's a lesson for us, we who have all the freedom in the world. And what do we do with our time? We should spend our days doing good for our body, for our soul, and for those who we hold dear. And I pray that all the hostages should find freedom so that they can have time to make a difference in the world.
Chapter 6, Same Old Story. According to Jewish tradition, Wednesday commemorated the translation of the Torah into Greek, an event which at the time was considered a tragic submission to assimilation. Thursday is the day that Alfred Dreyfus was stripped of his rank in the French army after being falsely accused of treason. The Dreyfus affair became a symbol of enduring anti-Semitism in Europe, despite the Enlightenment's promise of equality. And Friday commemorates the day in 425 BCE that the Babylonian armies laid siege to Jerusalem, a campaign which ended with the destruction of the First Temple and the 70-year Babylonian exile. Chapter 7, the longest-running book club. This week I asked Yirmiyahu Danzig, where's the meat in this week's Torah portion?
The meat in this Parshat Vayigash is the meeting between Judah and Joseph, but after Judah has learned his lesson from the very complicated and messy story with Tamar. And Judah has learned in a very roundabout way how life can get messy. And maybe he shouldn't be judging Joseph so harshly. And so he actually learns to humble himself and accept Joseph for who he is and what he's accomplished. So I think it's a very strong lesson about the complicated relationship between brothers and the ideal at the end, which is being able to recognize each brother for their own unique contribution and characteristics.
Chapter 8, looking ahead. That UN Security Council vote is probably going to happen right around the time we launch this video. If the vote does happen, keep an eye out for if it has any impact on the actual situation, or if it's just more of the UN blowing in the wind, or perhaps more of the UN blowing wind.